Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It's honestly so good to be connecting with you today. And how are things in these rather strange Corona days? How are things for you over in Germany at the moment?
Yeah, things are, I think, pretty much the same as what I hear from the UK, right? I mean, there's lockdown and some schools are, now at the moment, the school holidays anyway, and some shops are closed and restaurants are closed. You can't go out. You can't meet too many people. And for the most of the year, for all of the past year, most of my teaching activities, they have been online, actually, from this desk. From this desk, I've been traveling the world. I've been invited to conferences where I would have loved to go physically. I love traveling, but it never worked out. And so it all happened on this screen, at this desk. And I've never been in one point for so long in my life before. So
yeah, we were saying.
Become kind of some kind of normal, and I'm more familiar with it. And okay, but I hope it's over soon.
Inshallah. And I think this is the longest you've stayed in one place geographically for probably your entire life, subhanallah, which I think says a lot about you and your journey and this searching, this constant movement of inquiry. That is something that has always struck me about you. Someone who inquires and who is always looking, always searching and deepening questions, deepening knowledge. So I'm so excited to introduce you to our She Recites listeners and to the She Recites platform. I mean, I also, from my perspective as someone who has studied with you and watched your work and learned about your work, is that I think really you are one of our most eminent Muslim theologians and scholars. And I know, obviously your bio has that, it's very humble, but I think it really behoves me to say that actually the level of scholarship and the level of work you have brought to us as European Muslims, as Muslims all over the world, I think is not to be underestimated. Obviously, there is a story to you becoming a theologian and a scholar, and how being a woman in that context had its journey and its challenges, its story, if you like. There's always that expression that actually I find really interesting and sometimes quite annoying when someone says, oh, Shaykha Halima is one of the most eminent female Muslim theologians. And I always want to say, no, Shaykha Halima is one of the most eminent Muslim theologians, full stop. I think, I always kind of bristle at that. But I think there is, obviously there is a story to you becoming a theologian and a scholar, and how being a woman in that context had its journey and its challenges, its story, if you like. I suppose we've heard about where you are now. You're in Hamburg now teaching. Can you tell us a bit about that course, and then maybe we can go back and find out more about how you arrived at this place?
The moment in Hamburg, and I'm teaching at the university. I'm teaching Quranic Arabic. That includes, of course, grammar and the language stuff, and then also it includes exegesis, principles of exegesis. And the point is this is in the teachers training course for teachers for religious education, who are supposed to handle texts from the Quran more independently and not just parrot what they have been taught by whoever was not at the university and whoever any YouTube preacher you can imagine, right? And I mean, they are kind of try to get them to think about it, to think critically, and to investigate themselves, and to be able to do that with the limited resources they have. Yeah, it's not that they can kind of take a long, full course of Quranic Arabic. It's only 2 semesters that they can do it. And then they should be able to handle dictionaries and concordances and things like that. That's the one thing. They also then, of course, approach me when they have special questions, and that's a different matter. The other course I'm teaching is Interfaith Dialogue. That is with Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, Christians, Muslims, of course, and Alawis, the Turkish Alawis, who are kind of a group to themselves, a religious group. And then I have guest speakers who introduce a theme from their own religious perspective. And of course, I give the students texts to read and to study, and I send them for field work to the communities that are represented in Hamburg, and then they sum it up. And it's a master's course of, it's called Religion, Dialogue, and Education. You learn firsthand from the people from the different religions. And this is what I personally find very, very important, to never kind of talk about others, but talk with others.
Right. It's about having the tools to explore your own religion in terms of exegesis and handling a text, and then also how to connect with other people's ideas in a way that can sit alongside, that doesn't have to become a battleground of ideas, but rather a kind of side by side. What's at the heart of your approach in terms of exegesis and handling a text? I think our listeners would be really interested to hear, like, what's the core of your approach? What are those key kind of ideas and concepts and tools?
Yeah, one is that Quranic Arabic is 1,400 years old, and how did people possibly think in those days, and how are these thoughts contained in the Arabic, in the structure of the Arabic language? That's why I work a lot with roots and semantic fields. Yeah, for example, maybe Salam and Islam, they are related. That does not mean that Islam is peace. No. Islam it has the kind of aspect of peacemaking, yes, of reconciliation. Yeah, but you have to kind of understand how that works. It doesn't work from today to tomorrow. You say 2 sentences, and now I'm a Muslim, now I'm peaceful. Nah, then the struggle starts, right? And how is peace related to struggle? These key concepts. That's what I point out. Key concepts, part of them can also be recognized even already in a translation of the Quran, but you have to know it. You have to know something about the grammatical gender, which is different from the grammatical gender in English. And then, of course, if you just read the translation, there can be misunderstanding no end. And words already of an English man means human, and it means a male person. Whereas in Arabic, you can kind of carefully then differentiate between the 2 of them. In English, you have to kind of struggle with them, how to express that. That's one thing. But then the other thing is also how to translate these old concepts into today's world. And how do you see things in the old context, in the modern context, but also in the context of the whole of the Quran and the Sunnah?
How did you develop this way of approaching a text and this kind of exegesis?
Maybe I was practically kicked into this way of exploring and thinking at a very early age when I was a very little child. Maybe the trigger was that my father's half of the family was Catholic and my mother's half was Protestant, and this was right after the Second World War, with all the taboos around German history that were not talked about. They were there and they could be felt, and I felt that there was something that was not okay, because the Protestants and the Catholics, most of them thought that the other side were condemned to hell forever. because they belong to the wrong category. So I noticed very soon that there's something wrong. And then, of course, if I notice that there's something, then I try to find out what's wrong. And then, of course, I was curious, naturally curious. So I taught myself reading and writing when I was 4. And then I started reading, and always started reading and thinking, okay, it helped me a lot that I'm the eldest. I had no younger siblings, and I hardly had any children to play with. So I was left pretty much to my thoughts. My dad was quite supportive. He was an engineer, and he then also saw my curiosity, and he taught me the other scientific thing. Science and technology, so that he taught me some of these things when I was, and he liked animals and he liked exploring, so it went like that. And I wanted to find out what was wrong, and then I read what I could find about religions and cultures, and so in the course of time, this is where it got me. I found what the key, let's say the key of my theology is that God is one. And then the diversity among humans, they can be maybe compared to several siblings in the same family who have a different relationship to their parents. Or they have different approaches. If you hear siblings talking about their parents, then you don't get the same stories. Sometimes you can't even recognize that they are the same couple of parents. And that's the same with the religions, and people come from their perspectives and then they describe what they experienced from their perspective. So that's fine. So it gives me the possibility to walk along my way and accept everybody else's way. It's fine. They get there eventually, unless they come to kind of turn away from it altogether and forget all the values, and that's a different matter. But it's ultimately it's up to the boss to judge. Not to me, right? Boss being the one in the top, right? Yeah, I mean, that's the short version of the story. Teenager, I was the only Muslim kid far and wide, so...
I was going to ask you about that, yeah.
I was left to that, and then I knew already that, I mean, if I deal with something, then I want to know it properly. Whether that's technology or whether that's theology in that sense, I want to know it properly. And I knew already that I wanted to find out as much as possible. And that's what I did. First of all, self-taught, and then from scholars who were around, and then by traveling a lot, and eventually by summing it up and getting my...
You've concertinaed that story, that part there. Which I think is actually really interesting for people to hear about. So you went from this context of within your family of Protestant Catholic and exploring these issues, and then you came into Islam as a teenager and then began learning and studying by yourself.
I don't wait for somebody to teach me. If I want to know something, then I try to find it out, and studied by myself from the time when I was 4, when I taught myself reading and writing.
I remember you saying something about learning Arabic from the radio, or being... Tell us about...
No. That was different. When I was a teenager, I knew that I was a Muslim. And as a Muslim, you are expected to read the Quran in Arabic. I didn't have a copy of the Quran in Arabic. I didn't even have a proper German translation. I didn't have a German translation at all. Anyway, I asked a student who worked at the company where my father worked, Egyptian he was, I think, to write up the alphabet for me. So I memorized the alphabet. Then I had nothing to read. For a long time I tried to write German and Arabic letters, which doesn't work. Then I found a newspaper, and then I tried to decipher the advertising. If it says Coca-Cola in Arabic, then of course that's a success. Now I see not only I understood a word, but also I have seen how the letters are put together. So then I tried to kind of figure out what it says underneath the picture. So what's in the picture, if it's President Kennedy, then that's clear to me, like if that's the person in the picture. So then also it says about places. In newspaper articles, they have usually the agency and the date and the place. So from that, I learned what the places are called in geography. I learned a lot of geography from one newspaper. Well, later on, a teacher brought me a copy of the Quran, and I started spelling myself through the Quran, and very carefully because I didn't know the vowels. So I more or less swallowed the vowels. The result was a pronunciation that sounded more or less Moroccan. Sorry for all the Moroccan listeners. But they don't have many vowels. And then they found, the Moroccan workers who came then, they found my pronunciation quite acceptable. I mean, they were workers. They weren't kind of educated people very much, but they were really, really good companions. There were no books. There was nothing. Only some time later, there was an Arabic book in the bookshop, and I used to go there and leaf through the book. I didn't have money to buy books, right? So I looked at the book and I turned the pages and I read what it said. And I remembered what it said when the shop assistant came. May I help you, please? I said, no, thank you. I'm just looking around, put the book back and came back next time. So Amazing. By the time the mosque was built, I was 18 then. I already had memorized the first Surah Al-Fatiha and the last 10 surahs and Ayatul Kursi and Ayatul Nur and a couple of others. Only my pronunciation, the angels must have had a good laugh.
I mean, it's such an extraordinary story because especially now when knowledge is so available online literally at the touch of a finger, and yet what you're describing is coming into Islam completely solo, just pulled by your quest for understanding, for that connection with the boss, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that every piece of your knowledge every letter of your knowledge was so hard won.
The radio does have a role. No, it reminds me because I used to listen to Quran recitation in the night secretly. My mom wasn't supposed to find out. I was given that radio when I was 16 for my birthday. And what I found was Radio Baghdad. And they had Quran recitation as the last thing in their program in the night. So I had to stay awake until then.
That must have just been, when you heard that on your radio, that must have just, and you heard the Quran recited like that, in that way, that must have just been...
Yeah, it was completely different from anything I heard before. Right? I mean, you can recognize, even if you don't understand the language, you can recognize the news speakers. They have the same voice all over the world. In any language, you can see that's the news. Then singing, of course, in a discussion or something, anything you hear on the radio. But this was very special and it immediately touched me very deeply. And I immediately know this must be Quran recitation.
I have this picture of you in my mind as a teenager, kind of carrying your Islam pretty much in secret at that time, keeping it to yourself, picking up every letter, every letter has that blessing. We have that in the tradition, learning these letters and kind of the light kind of coming out of the radio as you hear the Quran recited in this way. It must have just been almost an epiphany. I don't want to kind of co-opt that word, but not, just this transformational experience. And so I can only, sort of listening to you, I can really, this thirst, this quest, this desire to understand and know. I mean, that's been your guide and your drive and your engine, if you like. And it didn't stop. It continued from then. So tell us what happened to that that teenager who pieced together all this information, who picked up Radio Baghdad and streamed it into Germany and began to put it all together inside. What happened to the teenager next?
What happened to the teenager next? The teenager found out that it was too tough living in a home where she had to hide everything, keep everything secret. So finally managed to, even before I was of age, which was 21, to leave home and then work for myself, earn my own money, and then finish school basically in this way and do the external exams. And at the same time, I attended the mosque, which was then a student mosque. It had been built by university students who collected money, and we were, can I say, it was like we were like a group of siblings with no parents at home. Everything was discussed. Everything was So night-long discussions and no end, and everything that I did, I was the only unmarried woman far and wide. It was a technical university, and women didn't study technology back then. So I was the only unmarried woman, and whatever I did, really, it was a matter of a general discussion whether a Muslim woman was allowed to, or obliged to, or forbidden, or whatever that was. And I certainly did not enjoy that, to say the least. But in retrospect, I wouldn't like to miss 1 minute of it for all that I learned from the different views from different Muslims, from different countries, from different Muslim cultures, from their background, from their family system, from their experiences, from that. And somehow that helped me. That was the first step into teaching me to handle the diversity among Muslims in the West, in the diaspora.
I can really hear how that kind of gave a context to the religious knowledge and to the different approaches to the texts, which I think so much of what your work is about. What are the different, because we can have really widely differing approaches to the same text. And so in that kind of mix of people that was there, you kind of really got a first-hand experience of that manifesting in real life. It came off the page into real life.
You are listening to the She Recites podcast, dedicated to the stories of female scholars, Quran reciters, and devotional artists. Don't forget to subscribe to us for more inspiring episodes.
So how did that come about then, your journey into scholarship and your journey into studying the religious knowledge?
Yeah, no, I read what I could read, right? I mean, it was not only Arabic, but it was also any bit of knowledge that I could find in any library that was accessible to me, which wasn't much. But there was, for example, a book of somebody traveling to the Middle East and having these experiences, and they described it, and that is something that I pieced together then, like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And I put these pictures together. Then at the mosque, there was, of course, the first library I saw with Islamic books as far as they were available. And in those days, I found that there was already an English translation of the Quran with commentary notes, the Yusuf Ali one. Right? That was what I found there. And something systematic. So now I can read the Quran again with these commentary notes and understand a little bit more. Then they had Hadith Collections. They had one thing that was Mishkat al-Masabih, that's excerpts from different Hadith collections. But I met the visiting scholars, and among the people who visited, there was someone who translated the Sahih Bukhari into English. So when he saw that I was interested, he gave me the whole set per. The first 3 volumes he had brought, and then he gave me the other ones as soon as they were printed. So then I read the whole Sahih Bukhari. I get something, then I read it. It's a book. I want to know what it says, and there's no way around reading it. That's what I did with Sahih Bukhari back then. I saw that the text, if you read Sahih Bukhari kind of from the beginning to the end, you see that on every subject there is also a discussion among the Sahabas. Now there are different opinions there, and they kind of figure it out. And sometimes the Prophet ﷺ confirmed something. Sometimes Prophet ﷺ, he also gave different answers to the same questions, depending on the context. So it was really almost like having a glimpse of everyday life back then. Yeah, because it was not kind of, I didn't read it for the purpose of finding out how I can argue a case. It's a different matter. That's a different approach. I find precedences for what I want to say. Okay, that's a different way of reading Sahih Bukhari. But this was reading the. But I mean, later on, of course, I read a lot of the other Hadith collections as well. But then there was a visiting scholars, and they gave lectures, and we could attend, and they did seminars, and we could attend, and there was students' discussion we could attend. It was all very unsystematic and not with exams or with anything, and nothing. But then gradually there grew a kind of foundation, so to speak. Well, then I went traveling. I got married, and then one of my fellow of the students there, by the way, I got married with, and we went traveling, and I went traveling, and we went to different places. And there I visited scholars there, and I visited study institutions there. I can remember Al-Azhar. They were sitting in the mosque. The teaching took place. Each professor with their group, and then you can just join the group. Nobody minds that you join the group. I think if I had Egyptian parents, they would probably have asked me what I do with all these men. Do I want to pick one? And the like. They would have prevented me, but nobody from my home prevented me. Certainly not my husband.
So just let me get a picture of that, because it's so important, because you're talking about Al-Azhar University, and I'm kind of picturing Al-Azhar in my mind from the time when I studied in Cairo, and so you just literally went to Al-Azhar and joined. You just walked in, and there.
Just informally, I walked into the mosque, and they just picked and I sat down, and that was it. I always thought, I mean, if they mind, they can tell me, then I go.
Yeah, but they didn't.
They didn't, no.
No, well, this says
I must say, I got a lot of support from male scholars. A lot of moral support, and also a lot of support when I was looking for material, when I was looking for information.
I just absolutely love that story. That's why I like to linger on it a bit, and kind of, because actually Al-Azhar was saying, well, why not? Well, someone's here for knowledge, come and get knowledge.
Sure.
Someone's here who is studying and hungry with this appetite for this work and this knowledge, and has already come with knowledge that we're going to add to. So they were like, well, I can imagine. Get on, come, sit, get on, do. But incredible. So you studied in Al-Azhar in the traditional manner, joining the different circles, and were well received by the scholars and colleagues.
Not for long, though. I mean, it always depended on my visa, and then moved on to other places.
Incredible. What were some of the other places that you went to?
I went to Sudan, and I attended some things with Sufi tariqat then in Sudan in those days. And always it depended on the visa. I got the malaria, by the way, and then we decided not to continue further south in Africa, but then to take a flight to Pakistan, where my parents-in-law lived. And then we stayed in Pakistan for quite a while. And I went there several times, and I learned a lot from there, from different scholars there again, and from my father-in-law, who was a lawyer. and he was kind of very socially engaged with all sorts of things, with helping, especially helping women to get their rights. He had a kind of quite a weight on that. So we discussed a lot of things, and in the course of time, even from him, I mean, I got support and knowledge and these things. Then, of course, we went back overland and to Iran.
What a fabulous journey!
Never forget those trips. They were really demanding, but I just loved it. For all that I saw and for all that I learned.
For me, listening now, I just think honestly, what I wouldn't give to have her to do a journey like that. It just sounds fabulous. Certainly, at the very heart of this scholarly institution of Al-Azhar, being a woman was not really an issue. It was about the knowledge, is kind of what I'm hearing you saying. And in other places, well, what's been your experience? I mean, have there been advantages and disadvantages to this journey as a female scholar?
Not that I remember. Not that I remember.
In terms of disadvantage,
then I didn't care.
Aha.
What happened a couple of times is that people wanted to prevent me from praying in a mosque somewhere. And the people who happened to be around, and sometimes they then let me in after I could recite Surah Al-Fatiha and a number of other things. Sometimes they wouldn't, because they still didn't trust me, because any atheist can memorize Surah Al-Fatiha, that's not that, and then I just prayed in front of the mosque. Sometimes also people told me, and it was very often women who said, there is no women's space in this mosque. I said, I don't care, can always stand behind the men. What I often did is then also in Pakistan, and went and or the women's room was closed or something like that. I don't care. I stand behind the men. Once you say Allahu Akbar, then the prayer can't be interrupted except in an emergency. And somebody who gets excited is not an emergency. It might be kind of a fire or a venomous snake or something like that, but not somebody who gets excited. So, I mean, I didn't care. We got all the support from my father-in-law, who said, yeah, you do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. It's so interesting because actually it's almost like this very pure line of pursuing knowledge that you're describing, that your heart and your mind were and your soul was set on, were actually not disrupted really in that way. What I'm trying to say is that at that level of pure scholarship, you were not excluded. It's incredible.
Yeah, but sometimes it's a matter of feeling excluded and following up on that feeling. Whereas, okay, I'm here, and that's with the permission of my creator that I'm here, right? And if they mind, okay, we live in a free country, they have a right to their opinion, but I don't have to follow them necessarily. So I don't have to feel bad about being here, and I don't have to feel bad because they think this and that of me. I can just be here and do what I want, what I find necessary, right? Of course, I mean, I don't confront people, and I don't start a discussion, and I don't get hysteric. And if people really don't want me there, okay, then I go. Next time, another attempt.
You are listening to the She Recites podcast, dedicated to the stories of female scholars, Quran reciters, and devotional artists. Don't forget to subscribe to us for more inspiring episodes.
And so, I mean, you came back from your studies and you led the community in Hamburg for 20 years. I mean, that's a huge...
In between, I must say, I met my predecessor, who was then my main teacher, and he said, why don't you kind of then put everything together into a system and then do the exam sit-ins. And then he enabled me to do that. And then in the process, when I came back to Hamburg, then I got stuck basically as his right hand in principle. Whenever he was ill or on the journey, then he just asked me to take over, and that's what I did. So I grew into it. And then the change when he retired and then practically made me his successor, it was not a matter of a big debate. People knew that I was there. People were familiar with me. So there wasn't a huge kind of thing about it.
One thing that I think we see a lot at the moment is that women scholars are often asked to look at specifically women's issues. You know, I say that with kind of little air inverted commas, you know, around the fiqh of menstruation or marriage and so on. And a lot of women scholars will, you know, are only asked to work with other women. They're not necessarily opened up to mixed discussions or sermons or lessons. That's kind of, I think, a bit of a format that we sometimes see at the moment. But what you're describing is actually that you were doing the broad base of the work of an imam or a religious leader in that sense.
Yeah, we didn't have the tradition that had emerged in the 20 years before, or the 30 years before. That was that there was no segregation in that sense. There were, women's initiatives and women's groups, and I wasn't really part of them. I was always part of the general thing, which was mixed. Like we did weekly Quran study class, and then of course greater part of my work was counseling. And then people came, and that was very often, a lot have to do with marriage and divorce. And yes, people came with ritual questions as well about menstruation and tahara and things like that. But then there were also men who came to me to seek advice. And I remember one case of a man who asked me if his wife is pregnant again and he doesn't feel like he can support another child, and what about her? So I remember I told him that he should have let his wife decide, because it was kind of a tricky situation. And his wife decided to have the baby, and the baby is now a grown-up man. Like things like that happened. Or sometimes it was about education and mixed marriages, and sometimes it was the Islamic education and all the other influences. Sometimes it was generation problems between parents who came, who had immigrated, and children who had grown up here, and there were certain misunderstandings that needed clarification. Very often it was that. Sometimes it was also, where do I really belong? Who am I? I know so how many. Now I have German citizenship. Am I still a Muslim, or what does it mean? And how do I reconcile the two of them? And then, of course, after September 11th, there came the whole political load, terrorism and violence and that type of thing. And how can you prevent it, and all that very much had to do with education, yes. It was my everyday life, but at the same time I was then involved in the university interfaith discussion groups, which eventually grew into what now is the Academy of World Religions, by the way. And I was interested there, and I was interested in mysticism. And some people, they actually came to me to ask about spiritual practices that to lead them on their spiritual way.
So your scholasticism is not removed. It's not in an ivory tower with kind of dusty books that have no kind of bearing.
Yeah, you can see my books, some of them.
Well,
few
I
books you can see, they are pretty dusty now.
Well, and I know that you enjoy and you love your reading and your time to read and your time to immerse yourself in ideas. But I'm also just really struck by listening to you talk about your experiences, that so much of what you've done in your work has also been about a very practical application of knowledge. It hasn't stayed just you and a dusty book in a small room. It's been very much about a lived experience of this knowledge.
Yeah, I don't believe that just living with dusty books in an ivory tower is really knowledge in that sense. Might rather be a combination of daydreaming and enjoying books without any relationship to everyday experience. I find everyday experience, along with the books, I find everyday experience very essential for knowledge. And it can change your whole outlook. I remember one case where there was a conflict about in Ramadan, and the local imams in the rural area where it was mining work, they said that no matter what, you have to fast in Ramadan, no matter what, no matter how difficult your work is, because that's a test of your patience, and that was in summer. Okay, somebody who was very wise, he collected all the imams and invited them to have one shift underground in the mine, to work one shift underground. And this experience, this touch with reality, that changed their whole outlook. Purpose of fasting is not to make you suffer. And it's interesting that in the Quran it says, especially in this context, it says, it makes, in Surah Al-Baqarah, in that passage where it says about the fasting in the Ramadan, there is kind of a general statement squeezed in. God doesn't want to make things difficult for you, but he wants to make things easy for you, which is a general statement in a particular verse. So what do we learn from that? Okay, I can tell you what I learned.
I'm not sure if your question was rhetorical. Yeah, tell us, Shaykha, please.
Yeah, it is about this touch with reality, and you must kind of always switch back and forth between the theory, the general, and the particular where you use it for. Every time, like in the Quran in general, Quran came, the Prophet ﷺ was sent as a mercy for the world, rahmatun lil alameen. So if I don't use that as a hermeneutical key for the Quranic text, that's too bad. I don't do the Quran justice.
I think that's a very profound perspective, a hermeneutical key. This idea of Rahma as a hermeneutical key, I think, is it's a very profound concept. And I know as well, one of the things that you taught us was I think it was a colleague of yours who looked at things through the lens of text without a context becomes a pretext.
Yeah.
And I've always remembered that as well. If we don't know the context, if we don't understand the setting, either in terms of Quranic revelation or the context of a hadith, to the present day application of, well, go down the mine and see how it is, then right, what happens to the text? SubhanAllah. And we have, in other traditions, we have the kind of liberation theology. We've had a green theology, and there's been a movement. I've read, kind of ideas around feminist theology from Christian theologians. Is there a feminine theology? Is there such a thing as that? Does there need to be?
Well, all these approaches that you mentioned just now, the liberation theology and so on, they came from a particular question, actual question. Is religion a matter of fossilizing rulership or power? Or how is it meant? And then I think prophetic figures, they have been quite revolutionary, and they have been very critical of power, of political power. So if you kind of try to reconsider that and read the text from that perspective, you end up in a liberation theological approach. And likewise, if you see that most of the scholarly books, they have been written by men, and they have been written necessarily from a male perspective, and very often women are the others. Then of course it's necessary to then see it from the other side as well, right? It's necessary, but it's not all. It's not,
right.
you can make it into another ideology. Like liberation theology, okay, it's necessary, and people have to be, they have to explore these ways of liberation from political power and the critical approach to, and likewise, you have to have a critical approach to patriarchy and whatever it can lead to. Eventually, you have to overcome that in order to cooperate. And it comes especially in the gender question. Men and women are men and women, and they are both humans, and they both have their own approach, and they can then cooperate by having a kind of live dialogue. It would be kind of a marvelous dynamics between the two approaches, if they are two. I mean, in fact, there are many, many more. There are as many approaches as there are human beings. That's why I like that and need it. And I like text study, not only men and women, but also text study, Quran and other scriptures along with people from different religions. Because they see something else. They see something, maybe I can't agree with their views or with their, yeah, but then sometimes they point out to me something that I've overlooked. Because I've been conditioned from my tradition, from my habits, then I don't see things, some of them.
I mean, I really appreciate what you're saying, actually, because I think there's a confidence and a rootedness in what you're saying, because sometimes we see questions and knowledge being shut down. Don't go and look at that. Don't go and think about that. These people will take you away from your iman. These people will, chip away at your aqidah. But actually, some of the kinds of the kind of approaches that we can hear. But I think actually what you're saying is you can be rooted and confident in who you are as a Muslim, and other people's perspectives you might not have to agree with it, you very well may not, but it will somehow also benefit and give you something that will help your own perspective.
Yes, it helps my own perspective, but it also helps me to develop my own perspective. And what I find necessary is that basic trust. Like, I mean, when I was a teenager and I was by myself and there was nobody to ask, and then of course I had my fears. Is that being a Muslim together with all the non-Muslims attending Catholic and Protestant religious education in school, does it take me away from my iman? And it was a genuine fear.
I'm sure.
And then in some book, somewhere, I read Surah Al-Kafirun. I don't serve what you serve, and you don't serve what I serve, and so on and so on. You have your religion, and I have mine. Fine, we live side by side. I can see what you do, and you can see what I do, and we don't have to interfere with each other, and we don't have to kind of damage each other's ways.
Could you tell us perhaps some of the most valuable things that you have learned from some of these kind of shared encounters with text with people from other religions?
Yeah, I think the most valuable experience for me was that the more challenges they are and the more you go through these challenges and expose yourself and deal with these challenges, the more the basic trust grows. It's like a relationship. And I mean, of course, there's first love and so on, and then you go through the ups and downs of this relationship, and then the trust grows along with these whatever conflicts or whatever it is, with this experience with each other. The other things was, of course, the surprise. The surprises came across along the way, because when I was a teenager and I thought that I wanted to study Islamic theology, of course, I was a victim of all the prejudices there were, and I thought maybe women can't do that. And so I said, okay, I might then be the first one, so what's wrong? There was a first woman who flew a plane across the Atlantic. There was a woman who was the first to be elected to a political office. So, but the surprise came when, and then you mentioned Christian feminist theology, when I read an article in a magazine on Christian feminist theology. And then I thought, okay, we don't have the Father and the Son and then that type of thing. But, I mean, the fact that women are sidelined, where are the women scholars in Muslim history? I don't know of any. You don't hear of any. So I started investigating and I started researching, and then I found loads and loads and loads and loads of women scholars from the very beginning.
From the very beginning.
Prophet and then generations after. Now, when did it stop? It stopped. It didn't really stop. It didn't really stop.
No. I suppose
necessarily see them in public. They weren't exposed as.
They went a bit underground.
They went a bit underground, and that needs to be remedied. That needs to be changed. I didn't really have female teachers, but then so the women I came to know, it was all through then studying mainly also scholars' biographies, because they mentioned their female teachers.
Interesting. So they would mention.
Yeah, they mentioned.
Wow.
Yeah, like in Arabi, for example, huh? They mentioned their female teachers. Or in Battuta, he mentioned loads and loads of women who taught at the university.
So interesting. So these great scholars would talk about their female teachers, but then somehow between then and now, and when you were studying, the female teachers had kind of gone a bit underground, and so you weren't able to have a female teacher, and yet there were the references to them throughout the literature.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Well, I was a bit angry because I feel that we have been cheated. Our generation has been cheated, not just by the big bad non-Muslims who want to kind of get through with their prejudices, but by Muslims themselves who don't speak about the female scholars anymore, and who don't make the female scholars known anymore.
Yes, because one can, I mean, when we reflect on what actually happened, I mean, why did the female scholars go underground? This is the question, isn't it? What happened? What was the process? Were they excluded? Were they sidelined? What kind of happened, really, I suppose, is what we're left wondering about.
I'm not sure. Sometimes it takes a lot of courage to be there anyway, right? Like, for example, I generally refuse to pray in a women's prayer room, which is not a prayer room in the first place, which doesn't look and which is aesthetically like just like a storeroom for the broom and for the vacuum cleaner. In this case, I don't go there. I go into the main prayer hall and stand behind the men. If somebody minds, they can tell me. Then we can have a discussion. Also, there used to be mosques where women were not welcome.
There used to be. We still have some of those.
You'll have that? Yes. I'm talking about Hamburg, right? What I did, and sometimes together with my students in my private study circle, get ready for prayer, go to the mosque in question, go inside and say Salam Alaikum as cheerfully as possible. And before somebody can react, really, or besides saying Wa Alaikum Salam, you say Allahu Akbar. And depending on how much you know of the Quran, or how often you are ready to repeat Qul Huwallahu Ahad, a prayer can take quite some time, and as I told you before, it can't be interrupted except in an emergency, right? By the time you are through, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everybody got used to it, or at least they are not exploding anymore. And then you can have that, if they say something, then there can be a discussion. Pretty meaningful.
Subhanallah. Subhanallah. So it's kind of like a pray-in,
that's what we call the pray-in, yes.
Subhanallah. I've got such a strong picture of that in my mind. Subhanallah.
But you have to kind of have the confidence to do that.
Yes.
And you find that many women don't, and many women, they internalize what men say too much to do such a thing. And I remember that I went to pray behind the men in a mosque where the prayer room was just disgusting, the women's prayer room. And there was another woman with me. I said, come along. And she said, no. Well, although, I mean, she could have, she knew, theoretically, she knew that it was fine.
Subhanallah, subhanallah. Everyone can relate to those experiences of those broom cupboards with a less than delightful carpet and so on.
You are listening to the She Recites podcast, dedicated to the stories of female scholars, Quran reciters, and devotional artists. Don't forget to subscribe to us for more inspiring episodes.
I don't feel we've been able to fully do justice to your story. We would need, I feel, a kind of whole series, really. But you've given us such great insights into your journey and your process. We have a kind of wild card question for the end of the podcast. So my wild card question for today is, I'm going to allow you to create a scenario that is your perfect afternoon. But you have to invite 3 people to share this afternoon with you. So first of all, it's what your perfect afternoon might look like, but it can't be a solo afternoon reading. It has to be a social. Okay, so that's my caveat. That's my caveat. It can't be, because I know that would be a perfect afternoon in one way, but this is a social perfect afternoon, and you can be joined by 3 people of your choosing, and they might be from back in the past, and they might be from now, probably not including the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because that's too, obviously that's too easy. We would all say that. So 3 people of your choosing on a perfect afternoon, what would it look like?
Well, there would of course be books, yes, but
yeah.
3 people, I think, for a really good, deep discussion on a perfect afternoon. That would be, I think, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Arabi, and Rabi al-Adawiyya.
Oh,
all very
wow.
different people. But I can imagine that we would have a very, very interesting discussion with our very different approaches. The
Wow.
more, let's say, scholastic Ghazali, and also from he comes with a completely male perspective, of course. Then Ibn Arabi, who has the mystical philosophy, the kind of high thing, and Rabia, who has, yes, this mystical experience, but with a very practical approach as well. Yeah, I mean, very kind of direct, practical, and the love-centered approach. I can imagine we would have a kind of a very interesting discussion. Yes, that would be really, it would be something that I'd greatly enjoy.
Yeah, I can completely imagine. The idea of it is just kind of quite intoxicating. And where would you? I mean, obviously they would take their discussion all kinds of places. Where would you like to start that discussion? With the three of them.
I think the British Library in the members' room.
Okay. My place.
Although I can only bring one guest. But I assume that Ibn Arabi would be ready to become a member of the British Library. He can bring the other guest.
I think he would. I think you can have dispensation. All three of them can come. You can have the place to yourself. You know, you might need quite a few hours, I would imagine.
Yes, yeah. There's excellent tea there, and there's excellent sandwiches. So
I think Ibn al-Arabi and al-Ghazali would enjoy that big column of books that you can sit beside, in the central.
Yes.
You know.
Yes, definitely.
You might have to stop Rabia going out onto the high road to see what was going on with all the people out there. You know, you might have to bring her back in every now and then.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I don't think he's tempted with scones and clotted cream and jam. I don't think so. I hope she's not fasting on that day.
She would. I can imagine she would be quite kind of, what's this? I haven't eaten anything like this my whole life. You know. Is this what happens with you people in England? But it would be the most tremendous discussion, you know. Yeah, wow. Well, honestly, I feel like we have just scratched the surface. Honestly, Jazakallah khairan for your time. It's been such a pleasure to hear about your journey, your experiences, the people that you've met along the way, your insights. It's been very, very rich, and I feel we've just scratched the surface. And to do justice to your story, you know, I feel we'd need a series. So inshallah, we can meet with you again and go deeper into certain parts of your story and go deeper into your plans for the future. But for today, Jazakallah khairan. May Allah give you tawfiq in all your endeavors and bless you for all your work.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. It was a very nice conversation we had, and I enjoyed it very much. And I wish you lots of success and blessings with your project. Thank you very much. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you once again, and salam alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.